Hi, I'm Rob King. Welcome to Homebrew number 40. This is for Oktoberfest and it's going to be a Marzen. If you were watching last month, you would see I had some equipment failure. So it probably doesn't come as a surprise that this month we're going back to basics with a simple stovetop brew. This is a great place to start if you've never done a homebrew and want to simply brew one up in your kitchen. So we'll look at all the basic equipment and I will call out if there's anything extra that is not necessary for a basic brew. So this month it's back to basics. This is the Homebrew Masterplan with 15 homebrews aligned to 15 special events throughout the year. Last month the 14-day summertime hazy really hit the spot. For chronological accuracy, however, I must point out the hazy started and finished while the Marzen was still in progress. The new equipment used in that recipe hadn't even made it into the shopping basket at the point this one started. So I pick up the story just after my previous brew kettle bit the dust while brewing the Blue Moon clone, and I picked up a 5-litre kitchen brewer all-grain kit to solve my immediate problem. There were still a few typical challenges along the way, and you'll see a complex answer to, in hindsight, what was a simple problem with a simple answer. Sometimes it's just too easy to overthink the problem. Sit back, enjoy, and cheers everyone. Happy Oktoberfest! The homebrew today is going to be a kit from Cross My Loof, and everything you need comes in the kit, including some instructions. Now, interestingly, the instructions do have a little bit of a variation between mash and boil, where simply we top up to a certain volume. This is a slight difference to how I've done it before, so I'll call it out when we get to that stage. Other than that, it's time to get going. The grains have all been ready crushed and we've actually got some detail about what's included. So we know there's 47% Pilsner, 47% Munich and the remainder as Crystal Light. Hops have also been pre-measured, 6 grams each at 2 different points in the brew. One is Hallertau and the other is Hersbrucker. Now both of these are really low alpha acid hops. We also have some Irish moss. It doesn't tell us exactly how much, but it is interesting that the dosage rates are really low. This was a previous recipe where we thought we were overdoing the Irish moss, and I think this verifies that we were, and a lighter dose of Irish moss is all that was needed. How I'm loving this yeast. It's not giving us a lot of details about the yeast, but it does say it's a Cross My Loof brew, Hal Pilsner yeast. Hal, that sounds great. And it's also giving us that the attenuation is 76 to 82%, the max ABV is 9%, and actually fermentation is between 12 and 21 degrees. Though it does mention for pitching, 12 degrees is preferred, so that is what we're going to aim for. The kit also comes with a hop bag for dry hopping. You can add those as an extra to the kit when you purchase it. You only need 5 grams of additional hops, but actually I had some in the fridge, so I didn't add that into my kit. I will use some of my stock when we get to that stage. Water is the Ashbeck water. I've used this one before because of its low mineral content, and we will do some water chemistry. However, again, that is an optional step. This seems a good point to mention tap water. Now it is perfectly valid to use tap water, but the reason not to is it can contain a lot of chemicals including chlorine, which will have a negative impact on the taste of the brew. This is the reason that I favour bottled water, and in particular I favour the Ashbeck water because of its very low mineral content. Now some beers have high mineral content, but we add those back in with water chemicals, which we'll see a little later on. Basic equipment is just 2 saucepans and a sieve. That'll get you most of the way. Also a large stirring spoon, a thermometer, of course a 4.5 litre fermenter and an airlock and bung. Other equipment is scales, hydrometer, measuring cylinder, wine thief, etc. But all of these are optional. The instructions are a little basic, so you are going to have to know the basic principles of a homebrew, but all the vital statistics are here, including the grain bill and the hops used. A 90-minute boil is listed here, but I feel that is actually too high and 60 minutes would have been fine. We ended up with quite a big top up as a result. Most of the details are in the mash and the sparge section. So the mash is 60 minutes at 68 degrees, requiring 3.6 litres of water to get us started. In the sparge section there is an error in the spreadsheet, so we don't get a lot of details. It just says 76 degrees #ref error. Okay, so this is where we reference back to the vital statistics, where it tells us the boil size is 6.3 litres. So we are going to top up to 6.3 litres when we get to that stage. One of the things not included with the kit is sanitizer. Now this is an essential consumable because everything that you're going to be using you're going to want to fully clean and sanitize before use to ensure there's no risk of infection coming into your brew. To get started, I'm going to heat up 8 litres of water. Now this is enough for both mash and sparge, and you could alternatively simply heat up the mash water at this point, which would be 3.6 litres. The addition of water chemicals is completely optional, and what we're trying to do in this stage is add the minerals that match the style of the brew, in this case a Vienna lager. Now at a 5 litre batch this is a pretty small amount, and I have to use a jeweler scale to measure them out, but for other brews that have high calcium or sulfate content this can really improve the flavour of the final product. I've used Brewfather to calculate the amount of chemicals I need for an 8 litre batch. You simply feed in the style, including the water that you're using, and it calculates the difference and the chemicals that you need to add. Well, we're cooking on gas, we're up to 50 already. Now this contains both mash and sparge water, so I'm nearly at 70 degrees, so I'm just going to move this to one side so we can get going on the mash. Mash is going to require 3.6 litres, so I'm going to prepare that now. Strike temperature 75 degrees. Adding the grains to the hot water is called mashing in. Giving it a good stir to make sure there's no clumping. So I've kept stirring until we were closing in on 68 degrees. So we are somewhere between 68 and 70, so that's close. And we are ready to begin the 60-minute mash. Measuring the pH is an optional step, and we should see the pH somewhere in the range of 5.2 to 5.6. Now we've come in at 5.5, so everything is good. Now if we had come in high, the solution would be to add lactic acid. Lactic acid reduces the pH by increasing acidity and therefore brings us into a range that is optimal for the mash step. Halfway through, it's worth giving it all a quick check. Make sure the temperature has been maintained and giving it a stir. Now on this occasion the temperature has come down just a very small amount, so I'm giving it a little bit of extra heat just to get it back up to 68 degrees and then cover it up for the remainder of the mash. 10 minutes to go and I'm heating up the sparge water. Now I'm going to actually heat this up a couple of degrees too high from the required temperature of 76 degrees because it will cool in the next 10 minutes while we finish the mash. Quick sit rep, the mash is coming to an end. My big pot, which was previously for the sparge water, I can now get ready to drain the grains. Now this is where things are a bit more complicated than usual, because using this recipe we have to bring the total volume up to 6.3 litres, but this saucepan doesn't have a measure on it. So I'm going to transfer back to this one which does have a measure on it to see how much wort we've got and then how much sparge water we're going to therefore need. Hopefully that all makes sense. Right. And we've got 2.8 litres from the mash, which means we need to add 3.5 litres of sparge water to bring us up to the required 6.3 litres pre-boil. Sparging the grains gets all those wonderful fermentable sugars into the wort. It also increases the overall efficiency of what we can get out of this homebrew. It was interesting in the notes that Cross My Loof had set the brewhouse efficiency at 75%. That seemed a little high, but certainly sparging will help. Right, so what we should have now is a volume of 6.3 litres as we move into the boil. Taking a pre-boil sample and gravity reading is completely an optional step. Now I'm going to use this to calculate the mash efficiency. Now using exactly the same setup in the future, I can become more and more accurate about the outcomes that I'm expecting. Today the pre-boil gravity reading is 1.036. We'll hear more about this later. We are getting very close to the boil. Happens quick in these small batches. Oh, did say things happen quick. Well, that was a bit of a surprise. Reaction time is a factor here, and we have reached the start of a 90-minute boil. We've got nothing more to do right now. The first hop addition is at 60 minutes, so I've turned on the extractor fan and it's a rolling boil. The first hop addition at 60 minutes is 6 grams of Hersbrucker. At 10 minutes we have an optional addition. This is 5 grams of Fermented O, a yeast nutrient. Also at 10 minutes we add the Irish moss. At 5 minutes it's 6 grams of Hallertau. The 90-minute boil is up. It's time to turn off the heat and move to cooling. Now cooling is as simple as putting it in a sink of cold water and giving it a good stir. This brings down the temperature reasonably quickly, but not quite as far as we're going to need. To get the temperature down to 12 degrees is going to require more than simply tap water. Now there are a couple of ways to address this. You could simply use ice water. This will be cold enough to bring the temperature down a bit further and get you down to 12 degrees centigrade. Alternatively, if you have the space, you can move it to a fridge. This is around 8 degrees C. It's a little lower than you need, so you just got to watch the temperature. But again, you can cool it down to the 12 degrees that you're looking for. Now I have a fermentation chamber called the Ferminator, and this chamber allows me to control the temperature similar to a fridge. So I'm going to use that in this instance, but again there are multiple options at your disposal. The temperature is down to 23 degrees centigrade. That's close enough to move to transfer. A 4.5 litre fermenter is perfect for this brew, but I am going to use a slightly larger bucket. A couple of reasons. One is if it's particularly vigorous, then you don't need a blow-off tube because you've got plenty of capacity. But most importantly, it's because of the dry hops. It's just so much easier to put a dry hop in a bucket than it is to a demijohn. It's not impossible, you can see me doing that, but actually I'm going to use the bucket mainly for that reason. It's time to transfer, and before we begin I'm going to put this nylon bag in the bucket. It'll allow us to remove all of the hop matter that's in with the wort. There's quite a bit of it, and we'll give it a good squeeze to make sure we get all of that liquid out. Optionally, we'll also take a sample for a gravity reading. More on this in a minute. Okay. I realised as I was lifting my oversized bucket into the fermenter that we were light on volume. What I should have simply done at this stage was add the additional volume up to 4.5 litres. That would have given us exactly what we needed to move to the next step. However, that's not what I did, and it was more of an academic exercise just to try it out, but as we'll see in a minute, I used a calculation to work out exactly how much top-up is required to reduce the gravity. Both methods are quite reasonable. However, if you don't have the additional equipment, it would have been much easier to have simply topped up to 4.5 litres. Meanwhile, back at the fermentator, it's time to attach the probe to the back of the bucket, and then we can monitor it until the temperature comes down to 12 degrees centigrade. The disadvantage of using the fermentator is it's going to take until tomorrow before it gets down to the required temperature. Also, I'm aiming for 12 degrees centigrade, but the pitching rate is between 12 and 15, so you can go for the higher end of that spectrum if it's a little easier. Action! We need to get this down to 12 degrees centigrade. Current temperature 25. Taking an original gravity reading will allow us to calculate the ABV once we see the finishing gravity, but we've come out far too high. We've come in at 1.076 versus a target of 1.054. Therefore, we're going to need to dilute the wort. Now this recipe has been worked out for us, and we could simply top up to 4.5 litres. However, that's not the route I took, and I actually went back to maths to calculate how much top up do we need. To calculate the volume of top up, you're going to need three pieces of information. The first is the current gravity, which is 1.076. You're going to need to know the target gravity, which is 1.058, and you need to know the target fermenter volume, which is 4.5 litres. Armed with that information, the first step is to multiply the current gravity points by the target volume. So in this example, that's 76 times 4.5, which comes out at 342. Step 2 then is to divide that result by the target gravity points. So 342 divided by 58 comes out at 5.896. Finally, step 3, you subtract the target volume. So 3.896 minus 4.5 comes out at 1.396 litres of top up, which we're going to have to heat up the bottled water, cool it back down to the same temperature as the fermenter, then we can mix it in to bring down that gravity. The temperature is down to 12 degrees centigrade, so we're going to take a small sample just to see how well that dilution did, and it's time to pitch the yeast. Now, as per the instructions, we're going to use the full packet of Pilsner yeast, giving it a good stir and splashing it around a bit just to make sure there's some air in there to give the yeast a little bit of food to get going. Day 0, 12 degrees for 18 days. The original gravity has come in at 1.054 versus a target of 1.058. Unfortunately, our calculation must have been just slightly off. However, we are much closer to the volume and the gravity that we were looking for. I think the method of simply topping up to 4.5 litres would have been far easier. Day 1. Fermentation just gently starting. Yoo-hoo! Still slow. Dry hopping is an optional step. Now the kit comes with a hopper bag, but not the actual hops, though you can add these on for a small price. The first step is to sanitize the hop bag, and we're going to measure out 5 grams of hops. Now I didn't purchase the additional hops, I actually used some from stock. Once the hops are sealed into the bag, we can transfer them into the fermenter. I'm just soaking the bag to make sure it sinks to the bottom, and we'll leave it alone for 5 days. It's day 7, dry hops day 2. Obviously not a huge amount to see, but we do have positive pressure back in the airlock. It is day 10 and it is time to remove the dry hops. The dry hops have been in for 5 days. We're also going to give it a blast of CO2 just to make sure it's protected as much as possible from the air, since we've opened the bucket up, and we should restore positive pressure to the airlock. Having sealed it all back up, it's going to remain at 12 degrees centigrade for the next 8 days. At the end of primary fermentation, it's time to increase the temperature 1 degree per day to 15 degrees centigrade, ready for bottling. It's day 21 and our first job is to clean and sanitize all of the bottles, ready for transfer. I've used the Ferminator to maintain a steady, cool temperature, but Marzen is more famous for being brewed in March when the ambient temperature is a little cooler. That's perhaps something to consider when you reach this phase yourself. Our first transfer step is to a jug so that we can calculate the volume to work out the amount of sugar we're going to need for bottle carbonation. We have come in at 3.6 litres, so at 9 grams per litre we're going to need 33 grams of priming sugar, all of which we're going to put together in a sugar wash so it dissolves more easily within the wort. You may be wondering why we're adding sugar at this stage, and to bottle carbonate we need to restart the fermentation process in order to generate some CO2. This time though, the bottles are going to be sealed, so that CO2 is going to be forced into the liquid, which is going to carbonate it. If we were to just place the wort in the bottles, then nothing much more would likely happen because all of the yeast has munched through available sugars, so there's nothing left to be able to generate extra CO2. A little extra sugar just helps it along, restarts fermentation just enough to generate that carbonation in the bottle. There's quite a lot of sediment left over, but cleanup doesn't seem too bad on this occasion. Ready, steady, go. Now, I'm using an auto siphon and bottling one to transfer into the bottles, and to be fair, that is the method I normally use to prevent any further sediment coming through. However, the wort was fairly clear, so I think a funnel and simply pouring from the jug would have worked equally well on this occasion. When I first started bottle capping, I used a simple hand capper, and that works pretty well. The problem was it takes a little bit of nerve to put the pressure on evenly to make sure the caps go on smoothly. Hence I did move eventually to this desktop capper, which works very well, but still I do make the occasional mistake even with this one. Bottling day is done and it's time to put the bottles away at a fairly even temperature of around 15 degrees centigrade for 3 weeks to bottle carbonate. Well, it was actually almost 4 weeks before I got them to the fridge, but nonetheless this is the final stage before drinking. So they're there for another 3 weeks while I'm off on holiday, so I can come back and celebrate Oktoberfest with a Marzen. I'm back from holidays. It's time to taste test the Oktoberfest themed Marzen. Ooh, good carbonation. In terms of appearance then, that nice copper colour, clarity is good, and you've got that thin, foamy, just slightly off-white head. Now, aroma is the biggie. Oh, there is such a strong malty aroma. That is very nice. I'm looking for toasty and bready notes, bread crust a little, but the predominant aroma is definitely that malt bill all coming through, very little from the way of hops. Carbonation also seems pretty good, plenty of bubbles in there, perhaps just a little over carbonated for the style. We'll try in a moment. On to the taste. That is a very, very smooth mouthfeel. It has a lovely malty taste to it. A balanced but very smooth bitterness. It's there, but very much like a lager, very quaffable. There is a lovely dryness to the aftertaste, which is, again, very much within the style. Overall then, if you are looking for a drink that has that refreshing lager taste that you can really knock back with some nice carbonation to give it that refreshing feel, but has a very malty rather than hoppy aroma and taste. Very nice indeed. Cheers, happy Oktoberfest everyone, good health, thank you for watching, do like and subscribe, thank you very much, cheers.
That's 11 down and 4 to go. No, scratch that, it's now 5 to go, with the arrival of 2 unexpected boxes of fresh pears. Ugh, the best laid plans and all that. I now have a pear cider to squeeze in. That's a third of all remaining brews to squeeze into the final 3 months. This is gonna be tight. It's now a race between the pear cider and the pumpkin ale to see which one gets there first. But check back next month for the Marzen retrospective to revisit the evaluation and look more closely at the vital statistics, costs and the final cost per pint. And always looking to brew a better beer, the retrospective delves into the lessons learned. Thanks for watching, please comment, do like and subscribe. Happy homebrewing everyone, cheers.